Have you ever felt yourself slowly being erased? It's not a loud process. It doesn't happen with a bang or a shout. It's a quiet sanding down of your edges, a gradual fading of your colors until you become a pale, translucent version of the person you once were. It happens in small, polite suggestions, in acts of supposed kindness that are actually acts of control, in the slow, creeping assumption that your life is no longer your own story, but merely a chapter in someone else's. For me, the erasure began years ago, a death by 1,000 gentle cuts, but the moment I finally saw it, the moment the invisibility cloak was torn away, was the morning I woke up with my hair shorn from my head. It was 2 days before my daughter Chloe's second wedding, and the silver locks my late husband, Robert, had loved so much lay on the pillow beside me like a pale, ghostly shroud. The first sensation was not sight, but touch. A cold draft on the back of my neck, a place that had been warm for 50 years. I reached back, my fingers expecting the familiar weight of the thick braid I wove each night, but they met only the bristly, unfamiliar stubble of my own skin, and jagged tufts of what remained. Confusion, thick and syrupy like the moments after a deep sleep, gave way to a cold, dawning horror. I sat up, the movement stiff, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. And there it was. My hair. Not just cut, but butchered. Hacked away with what must have been kitchen scissors, leaving uneven, gouged patches. It was an act of violence, intimate and shocking. On my bedside table, where my glass of water usually sat, were the shears from my sewing kit. They were closed, wiped clean, but a single strand of silver, long and damning, was caught in the hinge. I didn't need to ask who. Chloe had stayed the night, a rare occurrence. She'd made me chamomile tea, tucked me in, kissed my forehead with a daughter's theatrical affection. "You need your beauty rest, Mom," she'd murmured, her voice laced with that saccharine sweetness she used when she wanted something. Big weekend ahead, her fiancé, Marcus, had been with her. He'd stood in the doorway of my bedroom, his smile tight and practiced. He had an air of perpetual, benign condescension, the kind of man who called all women older than him dear lady. "We just want you to be comfortable, Alara," he'd said. "Let us take care of everything," and I, in my quiet, accommodating way, had let them. I had drunk the tea, which I now realized must have been laced with something stronger than chamomile, and I had slept a sleep so deep it felt more like a surrender. The silence in the house was absolute, but in my head, a roar was beginning. I stumbled to the bathroom, my legs unsteady, and flicked on the light. The reflection that stared back was a stranger, a ravaged, startled creature. The woman in the mirror was a victim. Her eyes were wide with a grief so profound it was almost silent. My hair, my beautiful silver hair, had been my one remaining vanity. Robert had called it my moonlight crown. He would brush it for me in the evenings, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle, the rhythmic strokes a soothing end to our days. After he was gone, caring for it became a ritual, a connection to him, a tangible piece of our shared history. It cascaded down my back, a river of memories, and Chloe had known that. She had known every story, every gentle touch it represented. She had taken those memories and, in the dark, had severed them. My breath hitched. It wasn't just hair. It was a statement. It was an erasure. They wanted to present me at this wedding, this grand affair for her second attempt at marriage, as something new, something more palatable. Not a widow still clinging to the past, but a modern, manageable mother-in-law with a sensible, short haircut. They had decided who I needed to be, and they had carved that new identity onto me while I slept. I thought of the wedding photographer they'd hired, a trendy artist who specialized in capturing authentic, candid moments. My long, old-fashioned hair wouldn't fit the aesthetic. I would be a discordant note in their perfectly composed symphony of reclaimed happiness. So they had tuned me. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, penetrating clarity that was more terrifying than the panic. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misguided, drunken prank. It was a calculated act of cruelty, dressed up as concern. I imagined the conversation between them, Chloe and Marcus, their voices low and conspiratorial. It's for her own good, she's so stuck in the past, this will force her to move on, she'll look so much fresher in the photos, the justification, the rationalization, the sheer, breathtaking entitlement of it all. They had deemed my feelings, my history, my very identity, as secondary to their wedding album. I leaned against the cold porcelain of the sink, the jagged reflection of my head a cruel mockery. I didn't cry. The time for tears felt distant, a luxury I couldn't afford. The cold in my bones was not from the draft on my neck. It was the chilling realization of just how little I mattered to the one person I thought I mattered to most. It was the understanding that to my own daughter, I was no longer a person. I was a prop. An accessory to be altered for her convenience. The quiet matriarch had been silenced one time too many. And in that fluorescent, unforgiving light, looking at the wreckage of my past, I felt the first, faint, terrifying flicker of my future. The question was no longer who had done this to me, but what I was going to do about it. The severing was complete. Now, the rebuilding would have to begin. The hours after the discovery bled into one another, a long, grey smear of time. I did not answer my phone when it rang, its cheerful, insistent chime a violation of the tomb-like silence I had wrapped around myself. I knew it was Chloe, calling to enact the second part of her plan, the performance of shocked innocence, the flurry of concern, the gentle gaslighting that would paint me as confused or hysterical. Mom? I came to check on you and you were gone. I was so worried. What happened? Your hair. I could script her lines myself. I had been hearing variations of them for years. I retreated into the heart of my home, the study Robert had built, a room panelled in dark wood and lined with books that smelled of paper and time. I sat in his old leather armchair, the one with the permanent impression of his frame, and I let the silence do its work. It was in this echo chamber of memory that the past began to reassemble itself, not as a collection of fond, disconnected moments, but as a chilling, coherent narrative. The flashbacks weren't cinematic, they were shards of glass, previously unseen, now glinting in the cold light of my new reality. I remembered Chloe's first wedding, a decade earlier. I had been a whirlwind of activity then, baking the cake myself, arranging the flowers from my own garden, sewing tiny pearls onto her veil by hand. I was the capable, endlessly giving mother, a role I had cherished. Robert was alive then, standing beside me, his hand warm on my back, whispering, "You're doing too much, Alara." Let them help, but I had waved him off, basking in the glow of my daughter's happiness, believing my sacrifice was the highest form of love. Now, I recalled Chloe's casual acceptance of my labor, her lack of any real gratitude, as if it was simply her due. I remembered her turning to her friends and saying, with a laugh, "My mom is just one of those old-fashioned do-it-all types. It's what makes her happy." She had defined me then, too, packaging my love into a quaint, manageable box labeled old-fashioned. It wasn't a compliment, it was a dismissal. Then came the memories of the years after Robert's death. The subtle shift in Chloe's tone. The way her "how are yous" became less of a question, and more of a prelude to a request. The first time Marcus entered the picture, after her divorce. He was smoother, more polished than her first husband. He exuded an aura of quiet competence that I, in my grief, had mistaken for stability. I remembered a dinner, about a year ago. The three of us at my dining room table. Marcus had looked around the room, a slow, appraising glance. "This is a magnificent house, Alara," he'd said, his voice dripping with admiration. "So much space. A lot to keep up with for one person," I imagine Chloe had chimed in immediately. "That's what I keep telling her, Marcus. We worry. All these rooms, the big garden. Maybe something simpler would be better. More manageable." I had defended my home then, my voice quiet but firm. "This house is my life, Chloe. Your father and I built it. Every corner holds a memory, Chloe had sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of manufactured patience. Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. We are just thinking of you. That phrase, I now realized, was their code. It meant, thinking of what we want for you. It meant, thinking of how your assets could be better utilized for our convenience. I saw a string of conversations, like pearls of poison on a necklace I hadn't known I was wearing. The time they suggested I add Chloe's name to the deed of the house, just to make things easier later on. The time Marcus offered to help me consolidate my investment portfolio, the one Robert had so carefully curated for my security. These old-style portfolios can be so inefficient, Alara, he'd explained, patting my hand. We could modernize it, get you a much better return. I had politely declined each time, a small, stubborn part of me resisting, though I couldn't have articulated why. It had felt like giving away pieces of myself, of Robert. Now I knew that was precisely what they were after. They didn't want to share my life, they wanted to absorb it. The act of cutting my hair was not an anomaly. It was an escalation. It was the physical manifestation of their entire campaign. They had tried to chip away at my independence with words and suggestions, and when that failed, they had resorted to a direct, physical act of diminishing me. They needed me to be smaller, weaker, less formidable. A confused old woman with a sensible haircut is easier to manage, easier to persuade, easier to institutionalize than a woman with a crown of moonlight and a spine forged in 50 years of love and partnership. In the quiet of the study, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I had built, the pieces clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. The mystery was solved. The enemy was not at the gates, they were in the heart of my family, smiling, offering me poisoned tea. The grief for my hair was transforming, alchemizing into a grief for my own blindness, for the years I had spent mistaking manipulation for love. The sadness was a vast, cold ocean, but on its distant shore, I could see the hard, unyielding glint of land. It was the land of quiet resolve. My phone buzzed again, a frantic, insistent vibration against the mahogany of the desk. I looked at the screen. A text from Chloe. Mom, please, I'm scared. Where are you? Just tell me you're okay. The lie was so bald, so shameless, it was almost impressive. They weren't scared for me. They were scared of the consequences of their actions. They were scared that the prop had walked off the stage. I laid the phone face down. The performance was over. My role in their play had been cancelled. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see Robert's face. I saw the ravaged woman in the mirror, and I made her a silent promise. I would not be erased. For another full day, I remained in my sanctuary, but the atmosphere within it began to change. The melancholic stillness of the study, which had at first been a comforting cocoon of grief, slowly solidified into something more potent. The air grew charged, not with sadness, but with the electric hum of a decision being forged. The turning point came when I caught my reflection in the dark glass of a framed photograph on the wall, a picture of me and Robert on our wedding day. He was looking at me with an expression of such profound, unadulterated adoration it stole my breath. I was looking back at him, my face alight with a fierce, joyful confidence. My hair was swept up, a dark and shining crown. We were a team, a fortress. And in that moment, I understood what he would say if he were here. He would not be telling me to mourn what was lost. He would be telling me to fight for what remained. His voice, a low and steady echo in my heart, would say, "Don't let them, Alara. Don't you dare let them diminish you." I stood up and walked back to the bathroom, driven by a new, cold purpose. I turned on the light and forced myself to look again. The shock had faded, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth. Jagged tufts stood up at odd angles, the scalp was visible in places, and the neckline was a brutal, uneven slash. It was a ruin. But as I stared, my perspective shifted. I stopped seeing the violation, and started seeing the blank slate. I saw not what had been taken, but what could be built in its place. The woman in the mirror was no longer a victim. She was a survivor. Her eyes were not filled with grief, but with a dawning, dangerous light. This haircut was not my shame. It was my war paint. It was the physical proof of my daughter's betrayal, a reminder of the stakes. I would not hide it. I would wear it as a testament. My quiet, accommodating nature had been a garden where my daughter's entitlement had grown like a noxious weed, choking out everything else. I had tended it, watered it, mistaken it for a flower. Now, it was time to pull it up by the roots. I went back to the study, my steps no longer shuffling with sorrow, but measured and deliberate. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over Chloe's name in my contacts list, a long list of her calls and texts now visible. With a steady hand, I scrolled past it. I scrolled until I found a name I hadn't called in months, but a name that now felt like a lifeline. Genevieve. Genevieve and I had been friends since our 20s. We had seen each other through marriages, births, the trials of careers, and the deep sorrow of widowhood. She was a retired estate lawyer, and her mind was as sharp as a shard of obsidian. Where I was soft, she was steel. Where I was accommodating, she was unflinchingly direct. Her voice, when she answered, was exactly as I remembered, crisp, no nonsense, and warm with an undercurrent of genuine affection. Elara. It's been a while. Is everything all right? I took a breath. The first words were the hardest. Genevieve, I said, and my voice was surprisingly steady, devoid of the tremor I had feared. I need your help. I need a lawyer. There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of surprise, but of focused attention. All right, she said simply. Tell me everything, and so I did. I told her about the hair, the scissors, the drugged tea. I told her about the years of subtle suggestions, the comments about the house, the attempts to manage my finances. I laid out the narrative of my erasure, piece by chilling piece. I spoke without emotion, my voice a flat, factual monotone. The story was so monstrous, it required no dramatic embellishment. I was simply a witness reporting a crime. Genevieve listened without interruption. I could picture her on the other end, sitting at her desk, a pen in her hand, her brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, the silence that followed was heavy. The cowardly, grasping, little fools, she said finally, her voice a low growl of controlled fury. The raw anger in her voice was a balm to my soul. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. She offered validation. She saw the situation for exactly what it was. They didn't just give you a bad haircut, Elara. They declared war. They just made the foolish mistake of thinking you wouldn't fight back. I didn't know how, I admitted, the first crack in my composure. That's what they were counting on, she shot back, her tone sharpening with purpose. And that's what we are going to change. Now listen to me. No more tears. Not yet. Tears are for later, when we've won. Right now, we need clarity. We need action. Are you ready? A surge of strength, pure and invigorating, went through me. It was the feeling of a general being handed a battle plan. Yes, I said, my voice clear and strong. I'm ready. The shift was complete. The quiet matriarch, the background scenery, the accommodating mother, that woman had died 2 nights ago. In her place was someone new, someone forged in betrayal and tempered by a lifetime of quiet observation. I was no longer the subject of the story. I was its author. And I was about to write a new chapter. First things first, Genevieve's voice crackled over the phone, a beacon of pragmatism in my sea of emotional turmoil. We treat this as what it is, a hostile takeover attempt. They see you as a vulnerable entity with desirable assets. Your house, your portfolio, your legacy. They've been testing your defenses for years, and the haircut was their final, brazen probe. They expected you to crumble. Our job is to build a fortress, and to do it silently and quickly. Her words were cold, corporate, and utterly perfect. She was translating my pain into a language of strategy, stripping away the tangled emotions and leaving only the clean, hard lines of a plan. For the first time, I felt a sense of control, a feeling that had been systematically eroded over the years. What do? I asked, my pen poised over a fresh sheet of paper. The simple act of preparing to make a list felt revolutionary. You do nothing that they can see, she commanded. You are going to become a ghost. No returned calls, no texts, no communication. Let them spin. Let their worry curdle into panic. While they are trying to figure out which retirement home to stick you in, you will be systematically dismantling every ounce of leverage they think they have over you. Her plan was laid out in clear, sequential steps. A roadmap out of the fog. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you go to your bank. Not your usual branch. Go to the main headquarters downtown. Ask for the manager. You are going to set up a new primary account, one that Chloe has no knowledge of. You will then transfer the bulk of your liquid assets into it. We leave just enough in the old account to avoid raising immediate red flags. We drain the swamp slowly. Ilara next. She gave me the name and number of a new lawyer, a man named Arthur Vance. He's a bulldog, Genevieve said. Specializes in elder financial abuse and complex estate planning. I've already briefed him. He's expecting your call. You will meet with him and draft a new will and a new power of attorney. Your current ones, I presume, list Chloe as the executor and primary beneficiary. Yes, I whispered, the word tasting like ash. Of course they do, Genevieve sighed. We will render those documents utterly meaningless. The power of attorney is the most critical. We need to revoke any existing authority and establish a new one that puts you, and only you, in absolute control. We can name Arthur, or even me, as a backup, but Chloe's name will be expunged. The word expunged was so clean, so final. It felt like a cleansing fire. And the house, Ilara, she continued, her voice softening slightly. The house is the grand prize in their eyes. The emotional and financial centerpiece. What do you want to do with it? I looked around the study, at the walls that held my entire adult life. Selling it, as Chloe and Marcus wanted, felt like a desecration. Leaving it to Chloe felt like rewarding a thief. I want to keep it, I said, the desire solidifying into a fierce conviction. But I don't want her to ever have it. I don't want them to ever profit from this place. Good, Genevieve said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. That's the spirit. Arthur will have options for you. A living trust is the most likely vehicle. You can live in the house for the rest of your life, in complete control. But upon your death, the asset bypasses your estate and goes directly to a designated beneficiary. A charity, a foundation, a university, anyone but your ungrateful daughter and her conniving husband. A foundation. The word sparked something in my mind. A legacy. Not one defined by my children, but one defined by me. A way to turn this ugliness into something beautiful. The final piece, Genevieve said, pulling me back to the present, is Robert's portfolio. You said Marcus wanted to modernize it. That means he wanted to get his hands on it. You'll have Arthur connect you with a new, independent financial advisor. Someone with a fiduciary duty to you and you alone. We'll have them review everything, lock it down, and ensure that any future communications have to go through them. We are building a wall of professionals around you, Ilara. A wall they cannot breach with their smiles and their sweet talk. The conversation lasted for over an hour. When I hung up, the single sheet of paper was covered in my neat, steady handwriting. It wasn't a list of chores, it was a declaration of independence. It was a blueprint for my own liberation. The grief and shock hadn't vanished, but they were no longer in the driver's seat. They were passengers, buckled into the back, while a calm, resolute version of myself took the wheel. My reflection in the darkened window showed a woman with a ruined haircut, but her eyes were no longer those of a victim. They were the eyes of an architect, studying her plans. The path ahead was clear. It would be quiet, meticulous, and utterly relentless. I would not rage, I would not scream. I would simply, methodically, and legally, take back everything they had tried to take from me. My power would not be in volume, but in precision. The days that followed were a study in quiet diligence. I moved through my life with a newfound sense of purpose, a secret mission humming beneath the surface of my calm exterior. On the outside, I was simply an older woman going about her errands. On the inside, I was a general executing a silent coup. The first step, as Genevieve had instructed, was the bank. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple, elegant navy dress and a silk scarf that I tied artfully around my head, concealing the worst of the damage from my hair. It wasn't about hiding in shame, it was about presenting an image of composure and control. I did not want to be seen as a distraught old woman, I wanted to be seen as a client to be taken seriously. Walking into the marble-floored main branch of the bank downtown felt different. I bypassed the tellers and asked for the manager, my voice firm. A kind-faced woman named Ms. Albright led me into her glass-walled office. I explained, without melodrama, that for personal reasons, I needed to restructure my finances for greater privacy and security. I did not tell her the whole story. I didn't need to. The simple, direct request of a long-standing client with significant assets was enough. For 2 hours, we worked. New accounts were opened, transfer orders were signed, and a firewall was erected around my financial life. With each signature, I felt a piece of my stolen power returning. It was a strange sensation, this reclaiming of self through paperwork and digital transactions, but it was potent. Every stroke of the pen felt like a correction, a rewriting of the narrative Chloe and Marcus had tried to impose on me. I was not a liability to be managed, I was the owner of my own resources. Next came the meeting with Arthur Vance, the lawyer Genevieve had called the Bulldog. He was a tall, stoic man in his late 60s with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He had already read Genevieve's notes. He listened as I recounted the story again, this time with even more detachment, focusing on the financial and legal implications. He nodded slowly, his expression grim. This is a classic pattern of undue influence and preparatory steps toward financial elder abuse, he stated, his voice a low rumble. The act with the scissors was an attempt at psychological destabilization. They wanted you to feel old, unattractive, and helpless. It's a disgusting, but not uncommon, tactic. Hearing my experience categorized in such stark, legal terms was profoundly validating. It stripped away the messy family dynamics and exposed the cold, hard armature of their actions. It was an abuse of trust, plain and simple. Arthur worked with ruthless efficiency. We drafted a new will, a document that was precise and unassailable. It named Genevieve as my executor. My personal effects, jewelry, art, furniture, were to be auctioned, with the proceeds going to a list of charities Robert and I had always supported. There was a single, pointed clause. To my daughter, Chloe, from whom I have already received all the attention I am due, I leave the sum of $1, to be paid from my personal account, so that she cannot contest this document on the grounds of having been forgotten. Arthur raised an eyebrow. A bit of theatre, but effective, he conceded. We then executed a durable power of attorney, naming him as my agent should I become incapacitated, with Genevieve as the alternate. The old document naming Chloe was formally and legally revoked. But the most significant part of the meeting was discussing the house. When I mentioned Genevieve's idea of a foundation, Arthur's stoic expression broke into a rare smile. An excellent strategy. A charitable remainder trust. You place the house in the trust. You receive the benefits of living here for your lifetime. Upon your passing, the house is sold, and the capital is used to fund the foundation you've established. It becomes untouchable by your heirs. It's a beautiful, elegant solution. We began to lay the groundwork for what I would call the Robert Sterling Foundation. Its mission began to form in my mind, to provide grants and legal support for older individuals who were being marginalized or controlled by their families. I would turn my pain into a shield for others. I left Arthur's office with a thick leather-bound folder of documents. It felt heavier than its physical weight. It was the weight of my reclaimed life, my protected future, my defined legacy. It was my armor. The final piece was the financial advisor. A sharp, fast-talking woman named Miss Chen who worked as a fiduciary. She looked over Robert's portfolio with an appreciative eye. "This is solid. Well built. Your husband was a smart man," she said. "But it's not impregnable. Mr. Vance is correct. Anyone with power of attorney could have liquidated this. We are going to put it into a structure that requires multiple sign-offs for any significant changes, all of which route through my office and Mr. Vance's, more signatures, more paperwork." Each one was a brick in the wall Genevieve had described. I was building my fortress, silently, methodically, while on the outside, the world remained unchanged. I imagined Chloe and Marcus, back from their honeymoon, tanned and self-satisfied, preparing their next move, completely oblivious to the fact that the game board had been fundamentally altered. They were playing checkers, while I, with the help of my allies, had learned to play chess. Checkmate was not far off. The phone call came a week after their return from a sun-drenched trip to Italy. I had seen the photos on social media, a painful parade of staged happiness against ancient backdrops. Chloe, radiant in white linen, Marcus, his arm possessively around her, a smug smile on his face. They looked like a couple who had successfully closed a difficult but profitable deal. I had watched them from a distance, my heart a cold, still stone in my chest. When her name flashed on my screen, I took a deep breath, centered myself, and answered. "Hello, Chloe." My voice was calm, neutral. A placid lake concealing unimaginable depths. "Mom?" "Oh, thank God. I have been so worried. I was about to call the police to do a wellness check. Where have you been? Why haven't you been answering?" Her voice was a cascade of practiced concern, each word perfectly pitched to convey frantic, loving daughter. It was a masterful performance. I had to give her that. "I've been busy," I said simply. Silence. It wasn't the answer she was expecting. She had anticipated tears, accusations, a hysterical outburst she could then soothe and manage. My simple, declarative statement threw her off script. "Busy? Busy with what?" "Mom, your hair. I came by the morning of the wedding and you were gone. I saw. I don't know what happened, it looks like you had some sort of accident." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity. An accident? As if scissors could spontaneously leap from a sewing kit and commit acts of vandalism in the night. "There was no accident, Chloe," I said, my voice remaining perfectly even. "Let's not pretend." There was another beat of silence, this one heavier, colder. She was recalibrating. Okay, look," she said, her tone shifting from concerned daughter to gentle therapist. "I know you're upset. And maybe I was a little out of line. I was just so stressed with the wedding, and I saw how much that long hair was weighing you down. It was an impulse. A stupid, misguided impulse. I just wanted to help you look and feel lighter. Can you forgive me?" It was a classic non-apology. It centered her feelings, her stress, her intentions, while minimizing the impact of her actions. It was a masterclass in manipulation, one I had fallen for 100 times before. But not this time. "I see," I said. Just 2 words. But in the space I left around them, a universe of meaning resided. I did not accept her apology. I did not absolve her. I simply acknowledged her statement. The power of that simple, non-committal response was immense. I could feel her frustration crackling down the line. "Marcus and I want to come over," she said, her voice now a little firmer, shifting from persuasion to direction. "We need to talk. We are coming back from our honeymoon with a lot of fresh perspective, and we have some really wonderful ideas for you, for your future. To make things simpler, there was that word again. Their euphemism for control." "Fine," I said. "Sunday. 2 o'clock," and I hung up before she could reply. I spent the next 2 days preparing not my home, but myself. I did not bake. I did not clean obsessively. The house was already immaculate. Instead, I sat in Robert's study and I read through the documents in the leather folder Arthur had given me. I memorized the key clauses. I absorbed the language of trusts and revocations. I armed myself with facts. I practiced the conversation in my head, not the emotional, accusatory one I longed to have, but the calm, surgical one I knew I must deliver. When Sunday arrived, the weather was grey and overcast, the sky the color of slate. It suited my mood perfectly. I dressed in a simple pair of grey flannel trousers and a cream-colored cashmere sweater. I wore no jewelry except my wedding band. My hair, which had begun to grow into a slightly less jagged pixie cut, I left unadorned. I was not hiding anymore. I wanted them to see what they had done, and I wanted them to see that it had not broken me. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find them on my porch, bearing a pot of orchids and wearing expressions of gentle, patient concern. They were a united front of condescension. "Mom," Chloe said, enveloping me in a hug that felt like a cage. "You look chic. See? I told you a change would be good for you." Marcus smiled his oily smile. "It's very European, Elara. Very sophisticated." The gaslighting was immediate and relentless. They were attempting to rewrite history in real time, to convince me that the butchering had been a favor. I stepped back, not returning the hug, and led them into the living room. I did not offer them tea or coffee. I gestured for them to sit on the sofa while I took Robert's armchair. My chair. My position of power. They launched into their pre-rehearsed speech. It was Marcus who took the lead, his voice smooth and reasonable. He spoke of their love for me, their deep concern for my well-being. He spoke of the burden of the large house, the complexities of my finances, the loneliness of my life. "We've found the most wonderful place, Elara," Chloe chimed in, her eyes shining with false enthusiasm. "It's called the Willows. It's more of a luxury community than a home. They have activities, a dining hall, on-site nursing. You'd have so many friends. We could sell this house, invest the money for you, and you wouldn't have to worry about a single thing ever again." Marcus slid a glossy brochure across the coffee table towards me. On the cover, smiling, silver-haired seniors played shuffleboard. It was their vision of my future, a neat, tidy, manageable box where I could be stored until I was no longer a problem. They saw me as a problem to be solved, an estate to be settled prematurely. I let them finish. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, letting their words, their intentions, their greed, stand naked in the room. They looked at me, expectant, waiting for my grateful tears, for my relieved acceptance. They had made their move. Now, it was my turn. I let my gaze drift from Chloe's hopeful face to Marcus's confident smile. I took in their entire performance, the united front of loving concern they had so carefully constructed. I let the silence stretch, becoming a palpable presence in the room. In my old life, I would have filled that silence immediately, uncomfortable with the tension. I would have thanked them for their concern, demurred, made excuses. I would have worked to soothe their feelings, even as they were planning the dismantling of my life. But that woman was gone. I had learned the power of stillness, the weight of a deliberate pause. It unnerved them. Chloe shifted on the sofa. Marcus's smile tightened at the edges. Finally, I leaned forward slightly in my armchair. I did not look at the glossy brochure for The Willows. Instead, I reached for the thick, leather-bound folder I had placed on the side table next to me. I laid it on the coffee table with a soft, definitive thud. The sound was quiet, but it seemed to echo in the room. "Thank you both for your presentation," I said, my voice as cool and smooth as river stone. "It was very informative. It has certainly clarified a number of things for me." Chloe's expression flickered with confusion. This was not part of her script. "Mom, what's that?" she asked, gesturing towards the folder. "That," I said, "is my presentation." I slid the folder across the polished wood of the table. It stopped just short of the brochure for The Willows, a dark, serious object eclipsing their flimsy, colorful marketing material. Marcus, ever the pragmatist, reached for it first. He opened it. Chloe leaned in to look over his shoulder. I watched their faces as they processed the first document on top, the revocation of power of attorney. I saw the subtle shift in Marcus's posture, the way his shoulders stiffened. I saw the furrow appear between Chloe's perfectly sculpted eyebrows. "What is this?" she asked, her voice losing its gentle lilt, replaced by a sharp edge of alarm. "That is a legal document," I explained calmly, "which formally revokes the power of attorney I once granted you, Chloe. It has been filed with all relevant financial institutions, and with my legal counsel. You no longer have any authority whatsoever regarding my health, or my assets." Marcus flipped to the next page, then the next. His face was becoming a mask of disbelief, which slowly hardened into fury. He was seeing the notification of the new will, the establishment of the trust for my financial portfolio, the summary of the new banking arrangements. Each page was a brick in the fortress wall I had built, and he was running into it at full speed. "The house," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide as she scanned the document outlining the creation of the charitable trust. "What have you done with the house?" "I have secured it," I said, my gaze steady and unwavering. "This house, which your father and I built, will remain my home for as long as I live. After that, it will be used to fund the Robert Sterling Foundation." "The what?" Chloe's voice was now a squeak. "A foundation I have established in your father's name," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "It will provide legal and financial support to elders who are facing pressure from their families to surrender their autonomy and their assets. I feel it's a worthy cause, don't you?" The blood drained from Chloe's face. Marcus slammed the folder shut. The sound was sharp and violent in the quiet room. "You went to a lawyer," he said, the words clipped. It was not a question, it was an accusation. "I took advice," "Yes," I confirmed. "From my friend, Genevieve, and from my new lawyer, Arthur Vance. And my new financial advisor, Ms. Chen. I have assembled a team. They are very, very good at what they do." "You can't do this," Chloe cried, her composure finally shattering. The mask of the loving daughter fell away, revealing the grasping, entitled child beneath. "That house is my inheritance. Our inheritance. Dad would have wanted me to have it." "Your father," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm, "would be appalled. He would be disgusted that the daughter he adored would drug her own mother, and shear her hair like a sheep, for the sake of wedding photos and a premature grab at her assets. He would be horrified that you saw his life's work not as a legacy of love, but as a piece of real estate to be flipped. You have fundamentally misunderstood the man he was, and you have fundamentally misjudged the woman I am." Tears of rage and frustration welled in her eyes. "So this is revenge? Because of a haircut?" "It was a mistake." I said I was sorry. "You are mistaken," I said, standing up. The conversation was over. This isn't revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. This is a consequence. This is a rebalancing. You tried to erase me, to make me small and manageable. You tried to take my story and rewrite the ending. You failed. Now, I am taking back the pen. This conversation is over. Please see yourselves out. Marcus stood up, his face a thundercloud. For a moment, I thought he might yell, might lose control. But he was too much of a schemer for that. He simply gave me a look of pure, unadulterated loathing, grabbed Chloe by the arm, and pulled her toward the door. At the threshold, Chloe turned back, her face streaked with tears. You'll be all alone, she spat, her voice filled with venom. You'll die all alone in this big, empty house. No, my dear, I said, my voice soft but clear. I was alone when I was with you, letting you diminish me. Now? I have my purpose. I have my dignity. And I have peace. That is more than you will ever have. I closed the door behind them, the soft click of the latch sealing the end of a chapter. I walked back to my armchair, my heart pounding but my hands steady. The quiet confrontation was over. The silence that filled the house now was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of victory. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the world did not explode. It simply went quiet. The quiet I had once found so oppressive now felt like a balm, a protected space I had carved out for myself. The initial volley of angry, incoherent texts from Chloe arrived within minutes of her departure. They were a jumble of accusations, threats of legal action, and wounded pronouncements of my cruelty. I read them without emotion, as if studying the predictable behavior of a specimen under a microscope. Then I blocked her number. I blocked Marcus's as well. I did not need their noise in my new world. A week later, a formal-looking letter arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened it. It was a blustering, aggressive letter, full of legal jargon, threatening to contest the new will and trust on the grounds of my diminished capacity and undue influence from my new advisors. I simply scanned it, then forwarded a digital copy to Arthur Vance with a one-line message. For your amusement, his reply came within the hour. Standard empty threats. Ignore it. They have no case and they know it. This is the last gasp of a failed campaign, and he was right. After that single letter, there was nothing. The silence from their end became absolute. It was the silence of defeat. With the drama excised from my life, a vast new space opened up. It was a space I had to learn to fill, not with the needs and demands of others, but with my own purpose. The Robert Sterling Foundation became the central project of my existence. It was no longer an abstract legal structure, it was my life's work. I converted one of the spare bedrooms, a room that had once been Chloe's, into a proper office. I bought a new computer, a printer, filing cabinets. The act of setting up that room was a profound declaration of intent. I was transforming a space once dedicated to the person who had betrayed me into a headquarters for helping others avoid the same fate. I began working with Arthur and Genevieve to build the foundation's framework. We established a board, with me as the chair, Genevieve as the treasurer, and Arthur as the legal counsel. We started small, creating a simple website and a brochure. The mission was clear: to offer pro bono legal consultations and small financial grants to older adults who were being pressured to give up control of their assets or autonomy. I wrote the copy for the website myself, my words flowing with a clarity and passion I hadn't felt in years. I told a version of my story, anonymized but emotionally resonant. I wrote about the quiet erasure, the subtle manipulation disguised as care, the feeling of becoming a background character in one's own life. The response was slow at first, then steady, then overwhelming. It turned out my story was not unique. It was the silent, hidden story of countless men and women who felt their lives shrinking, their voices dimming, under the guise of their children's concern. I would sit in my new office, the sun streaming through the window that overlooked my garden, and read the emails that came in. A widower whose son wanted him to sell his farm. A retired teacher whose daughter was trying to get power of attorney to help with her bills. A woman whose children were insisting she move into an assisted living facility she hated, so they could sell her condo. Each story was a painful echo of my own. I never met the applicants in person. I worked through a small team of volunteer lawyers and social workers that Arthur helped me vet. But I read every application. I was the heart of the foundation, and I made the final decision on every grant. Each time I approved a grant for legal fees, or signed a check to help someone secure their own apartment, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was the antithesis of revenge. Revenge is about inflicting pain. This was about alleviating it. It was about taking the poison that had been forced upon me and transmuting it into medicine for others. I was not just reclaiming my own life, I was helping others reclaim theirs. My personal struggle had become a source of communal strength. My legacy would not be a house or a stock portfolio passed down to a thankless child. My legacy would be a shield, a resource, a voice for the voiceless. It would be the quiet, steady work of empowerment. One afternoon, months into this new life, I was in the garden, pruning the roses Robert had planted. My hair was now a chic, intentional silver pixie cut. I had found a wonderful stylist who had shaped the wreckage into something beautiful. I liked it short. It felt honest. It felt like me, now. As I worked, my hands in the soil, I thought of Chloe and Marcus. I felt no anger, no hatred. I felt a distant, clinical pity. They had been so focused on acquiring things, a house, money, control, that they had completely lost sight of what it means to build something. They were takers, not makers. Their lives, I imagined, would be a perpetual, hungry search for the next acquisition, a journey with no final destination of peace. My vengeance wasn't in their loss, but in my gain. I had gained a purpose that filled my days with meaning. I had gained a community of allies and a network of people I was able to help. I had gained a profound, unshakable sense of my own worth. I had lost a daughter, but I had found myself. And in the quiet hum of my garden, with the scent of roses in the air, I knew I had made the right choice. Months turned into a year, then two. The rhythm of my life settled into a peaceful, productive cadence. The foundation grew, its reputation spreading through quiet channels, community centers, legal aid societies, church groups. We had helped dozens of people secure their independence, fend off predatory relatives, and rewrite their own final chapters. My role as the quiet, unseen benefactor was the most fulfilling job I had ever had. The anger I had felt was long gone, burned away like impurities in a kiln, leaving behind something hard, clean, and durable, purpose. The house, once a potential battlefield, was now unequivocally my sanctuary. Its silence was no longer a sign of absence but of peace. The rooms were filled not with ghosts, but with the quiet hum of my work and the rustle of papers that represented lives being changed. I had come to love the house more than ever, not as a vessel of memory, but as a headquarters for my future. One crisp autumn afternoon, a package arrived. It was a small, padded envelope with no return address, postmarked from a town I didn't recognize, a few states away. My first instinct was to discard it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it in the kitchen. Inside was a single photograph and a folded piece of cheap notebook paper. The photograph was of a baby, a little girl with big, dark eyes and a fuzz of blonde hair. On the back, in Chloe's familiar, looping handwriting, was a single word, Eleonora. The note was short, the handwriting shaky. I named her after you. I thought you should know. I'm sorry. I stared at the photograph for a long time. My granddaughter. Eleonora. A wave of complex emotion washed over me, a faint echo of sadness for the relationship we would never have, a flicker of the old maternal instinct. But it was distant, muted. It was like hearing a song you once loved, now played faintly in another room. The apology, "I'm sorry," was as insufficient as it was predictable. Sorry for what? For the haircut. For the years of manipulation. For trying to steal my home and my dignity. The words were meaningless because they were unspecific, a desperate, last-ditch attempt at absolution without the difficult work of actual repentance. I wondered what had prompted it. Had motherhood softened her? Or was this simply another tactic? A new key to try in a lock she had long been barred from. Perhaps she imagined I would see this baby and my heart would melt, the doors would be thrown open, and the inheritance would be back on the table. She still didn't understand. She thought my actions had been about punishing her. She couldn't grasp that my actions had been about saving myself. I placed the photograph on the kitchen counter. A beautiful baby. I wished her a good life. But she was not my responsibility. My family now was the collection of unseen faces I fought for every day. My legacy was the foundation that bore my husband's name. My love was poured into ensuring that other grandmothers would not be cast aside, that other lives would not be erased. I took the photograph and the note and I placed them in a small, wooden box where I kept other mementos of a life that was no longer mine. I did not need to keep them in sight. They were part of a closed chapter. Later that evening, I sat in my office, reviewing a new grant application. It was from an 80-year-old man, a retired musician, whose children were trying to sell his piano, the one he still played every day. They claimed it was for his own good, that the money would be better used for his medical care he didn't yet need. His letter was full of a quiet, dignified pain. "This piano is my voice," he wrote. "It is my last connection to my wife. If they take it, they take the last part of me." I felt a deep resonance with his words. I understood that piano. It was my silver hair. It was my house. It was a tangible piece of a soul. I approved the grant immediately, allocating funds for a fierce lawyer who specialized in protecting personal property. I wrote a short, personal note to be included with the official letter. "Keep playing," I wrote. "Let the music be your fortress." The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall. It was a good silence. A peaceful silence. A silence filled not with loneliness, but with the profound satisfaction of a life reclaimed and a purpose fulfilled. I had navigated the storm, and I had found my own quiet harbor. I often find myself standing by the large window in my study, looking out over the garden as the seasons turn. The world continues its relentless pace, but in my small corner of it, I have cultivated a sense of enduring peace. The work of the foundation is the anchor of my days, a constant and gratifying reminder that one can spin pain into purpose, that the deepest wounds can become the source of the greatest strength. I never heard from Chloe again after that single photograph. I do not know if her apology was sincere or strategic, and I have come to realize that it doesn't matter. Her motives are no longer my concern. My emotional landscape is no longer tied to her approval or her remorse. I have uncoupled my own well-being from the actions of others, and it is the most liberating feeling I have ever known. My hair is entirely white now, not the silver of moonlight it once was, but a bright, snowy white. I keep it short and stylish. It is not a symbol of what was taken from me, but a statement of who I have become, a woman who is unafraid to be seen, who defines her own beauty, who is comfortable in her own skin and her own power. The house breathes with me. It is not an empty museum of the past, but a living, breathing center of my present. The rooms are filled with books and files and the lingering scent of coffee. It is a place of work, of focus, of quiet determination. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit in Robert's armchair, not to mourn him, but to feel a sense of partnership with his memory. I imagine him looking at the foundation's work, at the lives we've touched, and I know he would be proud. Not because I was strong, but because I found a way to make my strength useful. I wonder if you have ever had a moment where you had to choose between the person you were expected to be and the person you truly were. A moment where continuing to be quiet, to be accommodating, was no longer an act of love, but an act of self-betrayal. It's a terrifying crossroads. The path of least resistance is so often the one that leads to our own erasure. The other path, the one of confrontation and change, is fraught with peril. It can cost you relationships, it can bring you pain. But what it gives you in return is invaluable. It gives you yourself. My story is not one of a dramatic, fiery revenge. There were no shouting matches, no public humiliations, no grand scenes of retribution. My victory was quiet, methodical, and intensely personal. It was won in law offices and bank branches. It was declared in the signing of documents, not the slamming of doors. It was a revolution of the self, fought on the battlefield of my own life. The greatest revenge, I have learned, is not to destroy your enemies, but to build a life so full and meaningful that they no longer have any space in it. It is to create a legacy so powerful that their attempts to diminish you become a mere footnote in your story, a catalyst for your greatest chapter. The final chapter of my life is not yet written. There are still pages to fill, still work to be done, still people to help. I am the author now, the sole proprietor of my own narrative. And I write it every day, with every grant I approve, with every moment of peace I savor, with every breath I take in this house that I saved, in this life that I reclaimed. I am Alara Sterling. And I am not erased.